What are you?
Hey folks, this is Justin back from Books, Bricks, and Boards. And today I'm going to do something a little bit different. Had a question come up in my comments regarding what I thought of Pathfinder as it compares to 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons. I've mentioned in a few of my videos that I did have an extensive campaign in 4th edition. We went from 1st to 20th level as me as the GM, or DM in that case. I've also played in some 4th edition. I was at Gen Con for the release of the Forgotten Realms campaign setting book for 4th edition. I was also at Gen Con for the release of the Dark Sun campaign setting book. I got them both at a pre-release time because I was excited about them at the time. I played in the Gen Con preview Dark Sun campaign game that they had tickets for back when that released. And I played as a player a little bit in 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons. That being said, as you can see right here, this is just kind of a sampling of some of my library as it regards to Dungeons and Dragons. And, I also have PDFs from DriveThruRPG on most of the books that I would ever want to use for any of the versions of Dungeons and Dragons. But you see, I've got a way to use the old red box type D&D basic games. I've got a way that I can play 1st edition. I've got a way to play 2nd edition Dungeons and Dragons. I've got a way to play both 3rd and 3.5 Dungeons and Dragons, though honestly I would probably just play Pathfinder 1E at that point because I have most of that line. But what you don't see out here is a way to play 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons. And it's not because it's a bad game. It's not because it is an inferior version. It's because it is, in my opinion, a relic of a time when there wasn't a better alternative for what it was trying to do. And to me, at least, Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition, it's not old enough to have the nostalgia appeal of these. It doesn't have enough flexibility to draw me to those. And it certainly isn't modern enough to replace this. You'll notice I also don't have any 5th edition books out here. I actually gave 5th edition a try. I played it for about a year and a half, ran a campaign. We went through the Curse of Strahd. And honestly, I feel like, for me at least, 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons is trying to blend this and this. And to me, it comes up short. And I much prefer the way they did it at Paizo with Pathfinder. That all being said, today I'm going to talk about whether I believe that Pathfinder 2E is 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons done right.
Are you me?
I'm badass, and you're good ass.
So let's talk about the similarities first. And I know that if you go on the boards, you will see a lot of people that compare this with 4th edition, especially whenever Pathfinder 2E first came out. A lot of people compared it to 4th edition D&D in a negative way. I do in a positive way. I think there was a lot to like in 4th edition that got overshadowed by some of the unpopular decisions that were made in order to make it more approachable to the MMO crowd. Because that's basically what 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons was trying to be. It was definitely trying to be World of Warcraft on a tabletop. And largely for my group, it succeeded. Most of the folks that played with me were either lapsed role players or first-time role players during my 2-year campaign. And 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons was an easy tool to either get them into the game or back into the game because they were familiar with a lot of the concepts from their MMO experience. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about with the consideration of Pathfinder versus 4th edition is that the starting power levels in both are going to be much higher than other editions. So back here in the basic game or Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition or even up to 3rd edition, player characters started much more fragile, lower health, and lower power in general than they would in a 4th edition game. In 4th edition, you definitely got the feel that you were playing heroes. You were not playing guys that just left the city guard looking for adventure. You were playing with somebody that had some experience under their belt. And as such, had much higher starting hit points. For example, in 4th edition, the starting hit points tended to be their con score, not the bonus, the whole score, plus a modification for their class. And then in Pathfinder, you get that blended hit points from the class plus a racial bonus or ancestry bonus. And they just tend to be higher than older editions. And your options for combat tend to be more robust even at an early level, which is also the case in 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons. We're going to get to that in a second, as I'm now going to talk about powers. So one of the blessings and curses of 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons was that it was set up as a video game would be if you were going to hot button a bunch of abilities. So in 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons, you would have at will powers that you could do anytime you wanted. You would have encounter powers that you could do once per encounter, utility powers, which could be encounter or daily, and then you would have daily powers that you could do once a day. Now, the way that this is like Pathfinder 2e is in Pathfinder's focus abilities. Now, the focus abilities, they're called focus spells, but I think most people kind of wink and nod at that when they're looking at certain classes' focus abilities. Monks are not casting spells, and largely a lot of them are not what would have been considered a spell per se in older editions or different games. Like the Bard's songs tend to be focus abilities here rather than an actual, it's not a spell to me. Another area where 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons is very similar is to Pathfinder 2e, is the focus on tactical combat. One of the great strengths of Pathfinder 1st and 2nd edition is that they get that very detailed strategic tactical combat system down where you feel like your decisions have consequence and your clever decision making have a concrete effect or impact on the game. Along with that, Pathfinder 2e has some skill actions that are usable in combat that are very similar to what some of the powers in 4th edition would have been. Another similarity between Pathfinder 2e and 4th edition was a balancing between caster classes and martial classes. So anybody that's familiar with 3.5 knows of the Codzilla, that would be cleric or druid builds that focus on abusing the lack of balance between casting and non-casting characters. Everybody knows that those could be pretty broken, and even in first edition Pathfinder, you could create some pretty broken casters. And in earlier game systems, it was more of a division. The martial characters were going to be more powerful up front in the early campaigns, and the casters became nigh unkillable towards the end when you were in higher levels. Pathfinder 2e and 4th edition try to bring those classes into line. 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons especially did this because they tried to balance based on role, not on the actual class. So you had defenders, leaders, strikers, and controllers. Strikers were the damage dealers. Controllers tried to manipulate the situations to give you advantages in combat. Leaders were buffers, and then defenders were tanks that kept people alive. And largely, if you had a striker that was an arcane character or a martial character, they were going to do similar amounts of damage and so on and so forth throughout the different roles, which kept the classes pretty balanced in combat. And that leads right into another way in which Pathfinder 2e and 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons are very similar. I did a quick refresh to see the number of classes in 4th edition, and I believe there were 26 official classes in 4th edition, which is greatly increased from the 5th edition official classes, not counting subclasses. And unless you got into some crazy splat books, you probably weren't regularly using that many classes in other editions either. Pathfinder 2e and 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons both pride themselves on a very diverse list of classes, and some that are glaringly missing after you have experienced them. I know that one of the ones that gets brought up frequently is the Warlord class, which is a martial leader type class. And, Pathfinder has like the Investigator and some similar classes, the Magus, things like that, that without doing some fancy multi-classing and some special feats, you can't really recreate easily in other systems. Another way that Pathfinder 2e and 4th edition are similar is in their leveling. Both systems, you were almost always going to gain something significant when you leveled. With 4th edition, you were usually gaining some sort of a power, either a daily encounter, utility, or at-will power that gave you more options when you were in combat or out of combat. Pathfinder, they have done a very good job of spreading out the benefits of their classes so that every level you gain, you are getting to make some sort of a significant choice that is going to broaden your options when you play. Another type of similarity between those two systems, Pathfinder 2e and 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons, is the numbers scaling higher. So in 4th edition, if I recall correctly, most of your target number rolls are going to be modified by a factor of, I believe, half of your character level. And Pathfinder, of course, because things are based on their proficiency system, it is also going to include your level in those rolls. So it can get to the point where both of those systems, you kind of level past certain challenges or enemies, and you you have to stay in the band of numbers that are appropriate to your level to have appropriate challenges and to have a good balanced experience. And then there's going to be two more similarities that I go through before I move on to some areas that I think are quite different and to Pathfinder 2E's advantage. So another area in which they are similar, though, is splat book focused. So if you've seen my buyer's guide, which was just based on the core books, it was not including the world books, the Lost Omen world books, which I will be doing a guide on later. You know that there has been a lot released already. Book of the Dead is going to be out later this month. Another 2 classes will be released with that. And so on and so forth. There's a lot of books for this. Well, with Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition, they were very heavily invested in you buying additional books. I think there were 3 players' handbooks, there were 3 monster manuals, and 3 DM's guides, all within just a couple of years of that system releasing. Some of the things that would have been considered core to the experience from previous editions and subsequent editions in 4th edition were relegated to the 2nd or 3rd player's handbook in 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons. Pathfinder also does seem to expect you to be expanding your options through their splat books, through their advanced player's guide, guns and gears, and secrets of magic already. But they kept those options more towards niche classes and options than what Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition did. And the last real similarity I have between the two systems is going to be the way that they handle multi-classing. So in previous editions of Dungeons & Dragons, multi-classing was very much more an all-encompassing type of system. So like you have multi-classing in 1st edition and 2nd edition, where you literally choose both classes and you advance in both classes at the same rate. Or you have 3rd and 3.5, where whenever you level up, you're choosing a class to level up in and you gain all the benefits thereof for that class level. Well, 4th edition changed that significantly by really making multi-classing feat-based, and you're essentially trading options in your primary class for individual options in your secondary multi-class. And that is very much the way that both Pathfinder 2E and 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons handle that. And I think it's a better system, and that kind of originated in 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons.
I ain't that good.
All right, so now I'm going to get to the part of the video where I explain what is considerably better in my estimation about Pathfinder 2E, and explains why I would enjoy a system that has so much in common with a system that I just said was a relic that no longer serves a purpose. First off, Pathfinder 2E has faster combats. The 3-action economy makes things smooth, and it also gives a more limited focus on decisions while enhancing the impact of each of those individual decisions. I think that in 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons, combats could be a bit more of a slog, whereas in Pathfinder, they tend to be very snappy and intriguing to me. Character diversity is another. The ABCs of character creation in Pathfinder 2E give oodles of choices while you are designing your character to be whatever it is you want him to be, or her. Ancestry is a very well developed concept that truly is a different take on genealogy than race would be, because ancestry really gets into the cultural impact, not just the DNA impact on your character. The skills and skill feats in Pathfinder really allow you to diversify your character in ways that were largely not possible in 4th edition, or at least not easily attainable. For example, if I really want my fighter to know how to pick locks or be stealthy, I can do that quite easily in Pathfinder. And then feats in general are going to be something that Pathfinder 2E seems to have found a really sweet spot. They aren't as impactful or broken as what they were in 3rd edition or 3.5 or 3.75, as I call Pathfinder 1E, but they have a real nice place within the system that makes them consequential yet not breaking if you make a particularly good or bad decision with them. Another area, I mentioned that the power system from 4th edition was similar to the focus spells of Pathfinder, and that is true. However, Pathfinder greatly limits these. Usually you're going to have one focus point for most of your lower levels, and you can only get up to 3 maximum. So you're going to have 3 potential encounter powers that will only recharge after you've had 10 minutes to rest and get them back. Whereas with 4th edition, you had index cards upon index cards of different powers and how they interacted with the game, and largely that is not a problem in Pathfinder 2E. I have found that the number of focus spells that you are going to use are going to be much more limited, and with Archives of Nethys, it makes printing those out and having them readily available extremely easy while you're at the table. Encounter building in Pathfinder 2E is much easier, just basing upon the average level of the party, and everything having its own flat encounter level, CR level, challenge rating level in Pathfinder 2E, versus kind of the unique but sometimes clunky system of solos, minions, and I believe it was elites or henchmen in 4th edition. It's been a while since I played that, but I do remember it being quite a chore to get the combats ready for my 4th edition games, especially if a player dropped in or out at the last minute, which could lead to some unbalanced encounters unintentionally as I was adjusting them on the fly. Pathfinder 2E is also a swingier combat. 4th edition was very math-based and could definitely be mathed out to a larger degree than Pathfinder, because Pathfinder has a much more accessible crit system due to the fact that a crit is anytime you get 10 above the target number. So that can create extremely swingy combats, both in favor and against the favor of the players. And it makes combat more exciting and less deterministic. And for that reason, I prefer that method, though your miles may vary there. Another thing that Pathfinder does better than 4th edition, and I think this was probably one of the biggest knocks against 4th edition for me, is that Pathfinder 2E makes magic more magical. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, in the process of balancing everything, making everything to be equal in effectiveness, they made a lot of the spells in the game be effectively the same impact as something that, say, a fighter or a thief would be able to do, or a ranger. And in doing so, it basically took away a lot of the feel and the flavor of the magic in the game, because after all, those spells are just at will encounter utility or daily powers, just like every other class has. So by having a different system, mechanical system, as does Pathfinder 2e and pretty much every other RPG that I've played, for the magical component, it gives a sense of wonder to spells and spellcasting that was notably absent, for me at least, in my 4th edition experiences. And then rolling right into that, Pathfinder 2e is not trying to be chess, which to some degree I felt like 4th edition was trying to be perfectly balanced, in that all strikers should be able to do roughly the same amount of damage at the same level and in similar ways. In Pathfinder 2e, you're going to have a huge diversity of roles within the group and within an individual combat or scenario based on the choices you have made in building your characters. And that leaves Pathfinder 2e without the feeling of sameness that Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition had to a lot of people, myself included. So this was a quick video. I had some things come up and had plumbers invading my basement, so it's been hard to film this week, but do have some exciting things planned. Hopefully going to be able to do a little bit better editing very soon. Got some new equipment on the way that should help with that. And hope you enjoyed the video. I realize that my takes are probably not going to be for everyone, and I would love to hear your comments and your experiences, because there's no bad game, there's just bad experiences. And if you had fun with 4th edition, as I did, then it could be the perfect game for you. But for me, Pathfinder 2e is where my sweet spot is at for fantasy role-playing games. This has been Justin from Books, Bricks, and Boards. Good gaming, and God bless.